Nigeria, a nation on the west coast of Africa, boasts a history rich in diverse cultures and ancient kingdoms. Long before Europeans arrived, these kingdoms thrived on trade and agriculture. Slavery, sadly, was part of this pre-colonial reality. It existed within the internal dynamics of power and labor. Slaves were often war captives or debtors. They served in households, worked the land, or were traded.
In many pre-colonial societies, land ownership was communal. Individuals were connected through lineage and kinship ties. Slaves were often integrated into these kinship structures. Understanding this context helps us grasp the transformations brought by the transatlantic slave trade. It injected an unprecedented economic incentive into the enslavement of human beings. The arrival of European powers unleashed centuries of exploitation and suffering. The arrival of European powers in the 15th century marked a turning point in Nigerian slavery. European traders established posts along the Nigerian coast, driven by the demand for labor in the colonies. These posts became conduits for the transatlantic slave trade. Coastal kingdoms like Benin and Oyo initially traded goods with Europeans, but the demand for slaves soon eclipsed other commodities. Increased warfare and raiding expeditions aimed at capturing slaves. Captives were shackled, branded, and forced onto European ships. They endured horrific conditions during the Middle Passage. The impact on Nigerian society was devastating. The 19th century witnessed the rise of the Sokoto Caliphate in what is now northern Nigeria. Founded through a jihad led by Usman Dan Fodio, the caliphate aimed to establish a devout Islamic society. Paradoxically, this ambition expanded slavery significantly. Leaders justified enslaving non-Muslims through their interpretation of Islamic law, acquiring slaves via warfare and raids. The Sokoto Caliphate became one of Africa's largest slave-owning entities. By the mid-19th century, scholars estimate that enslaved people made up over half of the caliphate's population. Slaves primarily worked in agriculture, producing cash crops like cotton and groundnuts. The legacy of enslavement and its impact on religious and ethnic divisions continues to affect northern Nigeria. The 19th century saw the rise of abolitionist movements in Europe and America. Public sentiment turned against the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade. Britain abolished its slave trade in 1807 and began suppressing it across the Atlantic. The British Navy patrolled the African coast, intercepting slave ships and freeing captives. However, domestic slavery continued within the Sokoto Caliphate and other parts of Nigeria. The colonial era brought new forms of exploitation. The British established a colonial administration in Nigeria. This administration often relied on forced labor and exploitative practices. The legacy of slavery and colonialism intertwined, perpetuating economic exploitation. Even though slavery has been officially abolished globally, its legacy continues to haunt modern-day Nigeria.
Human trafficking and forced labor persist, often targeting the most vulnerable members of society. These modern forms of slavery thrive in the shadows, exploiting poverty, lack of education, and weak law enforcement.
Women and children are particularly susceptible, trafficked for sexual exploitation, domestic servitude, and forced begging.
The International Labor Organization estimates that millions of people are trapped in modern slavery in Africa alone. Nigeria, with its large population and porous borders, is a major source, transit point, and destination for human trafficking.
The factors contributing to this crisis are complex and interconnected. Poverty, lack of opportunities, and political instability create an environment where traffickers can easily prey on the desperate.
Furthermore, corruption and weak law enforcement often allow these criminal networks to operate with impunity. Combating modern slavery requires a multi-pronged approach.
Addressing the root causes, such as poverty and lack of access to education, is crucial. Strengthening law enforcement and judicial systems to effectively prosecute traffickers and protect victims is equally important.
Raising awareness about the different forms of modern slavery and empowering communities to identify and report cases is essential. Only through collective action can we hope to eradicate this scourge from our world.
Section 6. Scars on the soul, social structures, and enduring inequalities. The transatlantic slave trade, the Sokoto Caliphate's slave-based economy, and the exploitative practices of the colonial era have left deep scars on Nigerian society. The social structures and power dynamics that emerged during these periods continue to shape modern Nigeria, contributing to enduring inequalities and divisions.
One of the most significant impacts is the legacy of ethnic and religious tensions. The slave trade often exploited and exacerbated existing divisions, pitting communities against each other in the competition for power and profit.
The Sokoto Caliphate's division between Muslims and non-Muslims, with the latter often being the target of enslavement, created a lasting divide that continues to influence social and political dynamics in Nigeria. The economic disparities that exist between different regions of Nigeria are also, in part, a consequence of the slave trade and colonialism.
The regions that were heavily involved in the slave trade, often coastal areas, experienced significant depopulation and economic decline. In contrast, areas that benefited from the trade or were centers of colonial administration often developed more rapidly.
These historical injustices continue to fuel resentment and instability in present-day Nigeria. Addressing these disparities requires a commitment to equitable development, promoting social inclusion, and addressing historical grievances. Reconciliation and healing are crucial for building a more just and equitable society. Section 7: Echoes of Resistance, Stories of Defiance and Hope. Despite the horrors of slavery, the history of this period is not solely a narrative of victimhood. It is also a testament to the resilience, courage, and resistance of the Nigerian people. Throughout the centuries, individuals and communities bravely fought back against enslavement, both physically and culturally. From the very beginning of the transatlantic slave trade, captives resisted their captors at every stage. There are countless documented cases of slave revolts on ships, escapes from plantations, and acts of sabotage against slave owners. One inspiring example is the story of Queen Nzinga of Ndongo and Matamba in modern-day Angola. In the 17th century, she led a fierce resistance against Portuguese slave traders, forming alliances with neighboring kingdoms and holding them at bay for decades. Within Nigeria, communities developed various forms of resistance, including armed rebellion, flight to remote areas to escape slave raiders, and cultural preservation as a way to maintain their identity in the face of oppression. These acts of resistance, though often overlooked, are a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who were enslaved. They serve as a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope and the fight for freedom can prevail. These stories deserve to be remembered and celebrated as an integral part of Nigeria's history. Section 8: A Diaspora's Tale: Cultural Connections Across Oceans. The transatlantic slave trade forcibly dispersed millions of Africans across the Americas and the Caribbean. Despite the trauma of enslavement, these dispersed communities carried with them their cultures, traditions, and languages. Over generations, they created vibrant and distinct cultures that blended their African heritage with the influences of their new environments.
This resulted in a rich and complex tapestry of African diaspora cultures that continues to thrive today. In Brazil, for example, the legacy of the Yoruba people, who were forcibly taken from present-day Nigeria and Benin, is evident in the music, dance, and religious practices of Candomblé. In the United States, the influence of various Nigerian ethnic groups can be seen in the music, food, and language of the American South.
These cultural connections are a testament to the enduring legacy of Africa's past and the resilience of its people. Today, there is a growing movement within the African diaspora to reconnect with their ancestral roots. From DNA testing to cultural exchange programs, people of African descent are seeking to learn more about their history and heritage.
This reawakening of interest in Africa's past is helping to bridge the gap created by centuries of separation and fostering a sense of shared identity and understanding.
Section 9: Shaping a Nation. The slave trade's mark on modern Nigeria. The slave trade casts a long shadow over modern Nigeria. It is impossible to fully comprehend the country's present without acknowledging the profound and lasting impact of this dark chapter in its past. The social, economic, and political landscape of Nigeria is in many ways a direct result of the forces unleashed by the transatlantic slave trade, the Sokoto Caliphate's slave-based economy, and the exploitative practices of colonialism. Recognizing this legacy is not about dwelling on the past, but about understanding the present and shaping a better future. Nigeria, like many nations with a history marked by slavery, grapples with issues of inequality, ethnic tension, and the need for reconciliation. Addressing these challenges requires acknowledging the historical roots of these issues and working towards a more just and equitable society. It is about learning from the past to build a future where every Nigerian has the opportunity to thrive. The story of Nigeria is a testament to the resilience of its people. Despite the horrors of the past, Nigerians have overcome tremendous adversity to build a vibrant and dynamic